right. Well, hello. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for having me. Thanks to Adam. Like he said, it's my first time here in Australia. It has been quite an adventure. Been around for 3 days or so. Already seen a lot of stuff. Wanted to see some kangaroos. I've seen a lot of them already. Most of them appear to be sleeping on the side of the road, I noticed. So next goal is to see a live one. Still have like 2 weeks to go, so I have high hopes. No, but seriously, thank you to Adam. I pinged him a few weeks ago, told him I was going to come to Australia just for the heck of it because I like traveling. Never been to Australia before. And so I asked him if I could stay with him for a few days. He said, sure, as long as you speak at the user group. So it's like, okay, here I am. Cheaper than getting a hotel room, right? Now I do get the feeling he didn't want to spend a lot of time with us because it was like the minute we got here, he decided to fall off his motorbike. So I don't know, dubious. But anyway, we got a lot to talk about. Who am I? My name is Markus Egger. I'm the president and chief software architect of a company called EPS Software Corporation, better known under our code brands like Code Magazine, Code Training, Code Consulting, things like that. And what I do personally is what I assume most of you guys do. I'm the founder of the company, but I've kind of come full circle, spend most of my time at this point writing production code. Probably about close to 90% of my time goes into writing production code. A lot of .NET stuff, a lot of HTML stuff, so the usual, the stuff that you would expect, right? Now, when I don't write code, I do a lot of presentations like this one here, or all the way up to the bigger conferences, and most of it done in North America. A little bit in Europe. I'm actually originally from Europe. Now that's why this is kind of a significant trip for me, right? I'm originally from Austria. So I've spent a lifetime with people thinking I'm from Australia, but I've never been here, right? So now finally getting around to that. So that's where I'm from originally. We actually have a business in Europe, but I spent most of my time in America. My company is headquartered in Houston, Texas. Personally, I live in Hawaii, so it's not been that long a trip for me. Relatively easy flight down here and very enjoyable so far. I'm also Microsoft Regional Director, or RD, just like Adam. So you guys are probably familiar with this, but I always like to point out what that means. It means I have a formal relationship with Microsoft, but I am not, very important, I'm not employed by Microsoft in any way, right? I don't get paid from them in any way. So I obviously like Microsoft a lot. That's why I have this relationship. But at the same time, I'm independent. I can do and say whatever I want, and those of you who've seen talks of mine know that I often do. And it's kind of important for the topic we're talking about here today. What else? I'm a Microsoft MVP. Actually, this slide's a little outdated. I guess I'm now supposed to be a Dev Division Dev Tool MVP, whatever they renamed it to. I have been an MVP since 1995, so I'm always proud of that. There's only one other MVP that's been in the program this long. So that's it about me. What else? My marketing guys always tell me I have to have at least one marketing slide. So here it is. We're consulting, business training, and so on. Do the usual stuff, .NET, Google, Apple, Azure, Amazon Web Services, databases, probably what you would expect. So that's it for marketing. I'm going to skip over that. Now let's talk about today's presentation here. We got a ton of stuff to talk about. In fact, more than I can cover, because this talk that I'm doing here today really goes with a series of presentations we have been doing for years, mainly in North America and a little bit in Europe, and that's what we call our State of .NET tour. And what we do in that is we go from city to city every spring, every fall. We do a series, and it's a long afternoon of content. Now, we don't have a long afternoon today, so I'll have to trim it down a little bit. But there's actually more content than I can cover here, and in the show notes for the online people, we'll put some links to get additional samples and information. And I'm just kind of focusing on the most interesting or the things that I know haven't been covered as much as some others. So, what are we going to do in the big picture? Well, we are looking at what is the state of .NET. In other words, what's important to us as .NET developers. That, when we started doing this series of events, literally was .NET only. Nowadays, it's different, right? Nowadays, we're talking about all the things that a .NET developer does, which includes a lot of things that are non-Microsoft, right? Whether that is things like Angular or various clouds and so on. So we're approaching it a little bit with the Microsoft angle, but it certainly is a little bit of a bigger topic than just that. But today we're going to start out, we're going to look at .NET as a platform, what's going on there. Then we're going to look at Visual Studio and IDEs. We're going to talk about web development. We're going to talk very briefly about Windows and cloud. I just don't have that much time to talk about here today. That doesn't mean it's any less important, right? So in the big picture, I kind of still do need to mention that in a way, but we just don't have that much time to talk about that here today. So that's kind of the overview. Little bit to set the stage. Not going to go into a lot of detail here, but just a little bit about Microsoft because it's kind of important for some of the later topics. Now, I'm not super familiar with the Australian market, but I think you probably saw the same thing that we saw in the US and in Europe, where Microsoft kind of did this dive a little bit, right? Like, be very surprised if Windows 8 was super popular around here. But things have truly changed with Microsoft, right? So in a way, I think one of the key topics that we now see kind of worldwide in all the locations I've been is Microsoft is back as a cooler, friendlier, and more open Microsoft. And I'm not going to go into all the details here, but the important part is the openness, right? And not just being open, but embracing just about anything and everything there is. And that's going to set the tone for a lot of the things we're going to talk about in more detail there. Now, I put up a few logos here. The most important ones, perhaps. It's not meant that there's anything beyond that, but this is kind of representative in a way. So Microsoft changed from being this Windows-only company where everything revolved around Windows, right? Like, why does Microsoft have Visual Studio, right? Why have they had Visual Studio for 20 years? It's the 20-year anniversary now of Visual Studio, right? And the reason for most of the history of Visual Studio was that Microsoft wanted us to develop for Windows. If that wasn't the case, right, there would have been no Visual Studio. And with Microsoft moving away from being a Windows-only company, that changes all that and has huge impacts. And then we can ask the question, well, what does that mean exactly? Does that mean Microsoft now says, well, do whatever you want, use your own development environments, and we're okay with that? Or does it mean Microsoft is truly embracing that scenario? And that's exactly what it is, right? The embracing of everything there is out there and helping people, helping developers with those choices that they make. And that's a true game changer, right? If Microsoft goes out and says, well, we now love Linux, what does that mean? Does that just mean it's like, yeah, fine, you can run Linux? Or does it mean we'll help you with Linux, right? And that's, like I said, that's exactly what it is. So we'll see that has a huge impact throughout some of the things that we're talking about. The open Microsoft, right? Microsoft turning to open source. That's very, very interesting. I mean, now a way you can look at it is, unless there's a good reason for Microsoft to not do something open source, the default in DevDiff especially is they are doing open source. So if you are into ASP.NET, the core version of the new ASP.NET, what used to be called vNext, if you followed that whole vNext development cycle, you could follow that on GitHub and you could become part of it all. You could look at the check-ins, you could add your own submissions and post pull requests and see the bug tracking and all that sort of stuff. So very, very open, very interesting developments. Also very interesting because open source software at that scale is, almost, I don't want to say unheard of, but this is pretty serious stuff, right? And some of the pain that comes along with that, like some people were like, well, we saw all this stuff in vNext and now it's all changed and how dare you, right? Well, that's what open source is like, right? You see how it's made. And so again, very, very interesting development. I put up the GitHub logo here simply because that's where Microsoft does all that stuff, right? So if you want to follow along. So anyway, that's kind of the quick overview. Just to set the stage a little bit, right? I could talk about any of these subjects for 2 or 3 hours on its own, but that's where we leave it today.